Well, I think we're live on my channel. So, welcome to a pop up live because I was thinking today. So, as we're entering into a new year, we have a lot of new expectations that we've set on ourselves. And maybe we're trying to change a habit, an old habit, into a better positive habit, some habit that wasn't serving you in 2024. And I was thinking about how some people are feeling less than motivated, and they're actually feeling a lot of anxiety and anxious that they've set this new expectation for themselves. And you may be one of those people who have set it year after year after year only to fall short. And so I wanted to come in here and I wanted to talk about a sensitive yet really profoundly important topic. And that's our complex relationship with suffering. So I've done a video on this before. And I actually had a person of our community, a couple of people actually comment on that video, and they wanted to explore that relationship a little bit deeper because they want to understand, why are some of us drawn to painful situations, whether it's relationships, staying at the same job, whatever. And how does this affect our ability to be able to heal and grow? So ultimately, if we're setting up certain expectations and we keep falling short time and time again, it could be because we're constantly drawn to these emotionally painful situations and we're really unable to meet those expectations. And many of us will just simply find ourselves repeatedly drawn to these situations, and they also probably, a lot of them, mirror some sort of past trauma you may have experienced. Now, I want you to understand that sometimes this isn't always conscious. It can be a way for your psyche to resolve some sort of unfinished business. And there was a popular psychologist, Freud, I don't know if you know him, but he actually put forth a theory about that it might be possibly an attempt to rewrite the endings to your past traumatic experiences by engaging in similar situations and keep doing it over and over and over. And you're hoping to get it right each time you try something, try it again, right? And then when you think about it on a biological or a neurological level, we understand that our brains can sometimes misinterpret familiar pain as feeling comfortable. So it's comforting and it makes us feel safe. And I know that sounds strange. It's a known phenomena where chaos and suffering become comforting because you've been experiencing, that's all you've been experiencing, and it becomes familiar. Not because it's healthy, just because it's familiar. And most of the time, many of us will stay in situations not because we don't know that we need to leave or we need something, more positive or healthy. It's because it's familiar to us, not because it's healthy at all. And yes, humans have a complex relationship with suffering. And stay with me because we're going to attempt to unravel this. But first, before we get to a conclusion, we need to take a brief trip in time. And what I mean by that, let's look at a couple perspectives on human suffering. And let's start with philosophical perspectives first, because philosophers have long debated whether suffering is a necessary part of the human experience. And some of them have even argued that it's actually essential for growth, while others believe it's something we should actually strive to overcome. And let's kind of walk through that journey together, because throughout history, philosophers have deeply engaged with this concept of suffering, and they've offered a lot of varying perspectives, and they've done this across different eras. So we've got, ancient philosophers emphasizing acceptance and control over our internal reactions to some sort of external event. So that actually aligns really closely with the Buddhist views, where desire and attachment are actually the roots of suffering in humans. And so it's advocating for more of an enlightenment through this eightfold path. And we're not going to get into actually what that is. I just want to take a look at some of the historical journey and what some of these, what we've had to believe about human suffering. We also know that medieval Christian philosophers saw, excuse me, saw suffering as a spiritual test. And suffering meant that you would grow closer to God. So that was an interesting perspective, along with, if you look at more modern existentialists, they're actually arguing that suffering is actually intrinsic to human existence. And it's offering a canvas for your own personal authenticity, and it's giving you some meaning in life. Contemporary thinkers who look at suffering, human suffering, they do this through the lens of what they call capability deprivation. And that just simply means that suffering is emphasized in the fact that it has a role. It has a role in hindering our personal and any communal development. And, you have to also consider there's some philosophers talking about its ethical implications. So they focus on the idea of reducing suffering through more practical action. So there's a lot of diverse perspectives, as you can see, from the ancient philosophical understanding of it to the more modern understanding of it. But ultimately, I think you can see that it was viewed as, or is viewed as, this inevitable part of human life. It is a critical element if you want to grow, both personally or ethically. When you look at it from a psychological standpoint, though, suffering can sometimes feel rewarding. And that's where you get into this need that humans have to suffer. Now, this might be due to some biochemical factors, because endorphins are released during stress when you're suffering from some sort of emotional trauma or stress. It's a psychological phenomenon that you've probably heard of, known as the martyr complex. So let's unpack that idea together, because the idea that suffering can sometimes feel rewarding involves complex interactions of both biochemical and psychological factors. Now, what does that mean? Well, I told you about endorphins. Now, these are chemicals that are produced by your nervous system, and when they are coming out and expressing in large numbers, it usually means you're suffering with some sort of pain or stress. That is known as, they're released because they're your body's natural pain relievers. They're often linked to feelings of euphoria or feelings of stress. And this biochemical response can explain while some forms of suffering, and this would be things like intense physical exercise or overcoming a difficult challenge, can eventually feel rewarding. Think runner's high. Now, when you push through some painful experience, guess what's happening? Your body is releasing even more endorphins. So now you're getting this feeling, this well-being just coursing through your body. And again, that's equated to what people have experienced, runners who call it a runner's high. When you think about it on psychological space, and I talked about the martyr complex, it's a personality trait. And this is when a person is seeking out suffering or some sort of persecution because they believe they're being heroic or virtuous in some space. And for people who have this martyr complex, suffering is actually a way to affirm their own values or maybe gain sympathy or admiration from others. And this complex can make suffering feel actually good. It feels rewarding because it aligns with this deep-seated need to be perceived as a victim or a hero of their own narrative. We also know that psychologically speaking, we have, enduring pain or hardship is often seen as a rite of passage, a necessary step to achieve some sort of higher state of being or understanding. Now, where does that come into play? Well, we see that in many cultural and religious practices where enduring suffering is equated with spiritual purification or some sort of moral test. Also, there's a concept known as post-traumatic growth. That's where individuals who experience personal growth after they have struggled with some sort of major life crisis or traumatic event. So you've had a crisis, you've had a trauma, and you've experienced some sort of personal growth. And the process of overcoming these challenges can lead to improved resilience, possibly deeper relationships, possibly increased strength, self confidence, and you might have a greater appreciation for life. So these elements combine to form a really complex picture where suffering might not be endured, but also can be sought after or valued as part of a deeper psychological need or some sort of biological response. So it's a duality that's happening of suffering. So it seems to be a natural, aversive experience, and it also seems to be a potential source of psychological reward. So this is kind of highlighting the intricate ways in which our minds and our bodies are attempting to adapt and interpret difficulties. Culturally speaking, so we're still going on that journey looking at suffering from these different perspectives, but culturally speaking, the glorification of suffering through a narrative of struggle and triumph, you probably recognize it as a really pervasive theme, and it crosses many different societies and historical periods. It can be observed in a lot of different places, cultural expression. So, what do I mean? Literature, movies, religion, mythology. Many classic and modern stories and films will focus on a protagonist overcoming some sort of adversity, often against great odds. And these stories usually culminate in can I talk today? Protagonist achieving a significant personal or some sort of external triumph. And it's celebrated as a testament to the human spirit and resilience. So you've got, I mean, there are a ton of examples out there, but I think you understand that that's the main theme of most of the movies, the modern movies out for sure, and even the ones that aren't so modern. We also know that it's seen in religious narratives because in many religious traditions, suffering is portrayed as a test of faith or a necessary path to spiritual enlightenment. If you take Christianity, for example, the way of suffering is embodied and it's seen as a really profound sacrifice and model for enduring hardship. Okay. It's seen in many other different religions, but that would be a totally different video. So, but you can do your own research and take a look at it. We also know, I mentioned mythology. So myths are often, they feature heroes who have to go through a lot of hardship to achieve some sort of goal or to transform themselves. And what you see is they go through this hardship, they have these personal developments, also moral developments. So we know that there are a lot of those mythologies where it's representing that hero's journey towards redemption, and usually higher morals. Another thing, when we think about philosophers and these ethical perspectives on human suffering, they have influenced societal values. And they have influenced them because the notion of these cultural ideologies promoting the idea that suffering is not only inevitable, but also could possibly be beneficial to your own personal growth, and obviously could lead to greater, strength or wisdom. It really plays a critical role in shaping societal attitudes towards suffering. So, what do I mean? It's like, it's just framing it as like, listen, it's necessary. It's necessary, and it's even become the sort of noble part of the human experience because it can lead to greater personal integrity and some sort of honor. So we've journeyed through a quick look at a wide array of views on suffering. So from the ancient views, the philosophical views, to the psychological theories that explain that tendency to repeat these painful cycles. I was hoping that by taking you through that exploration, it would help you to understand the complexity of human suffering and its deep roots in our personal and collective psyche when we're trying to understand the nature of human suffering. But now what, right? Because most of these views we explored seem to be telling us that it's not possible to escape suffering and that there are many valid reasons why suffering is actually a badge of honor, right? I mean, we talked about them. It's not. If anyone tells you that suffering is a badge of honor, it's actually not. It's crucial to recognize that while, of course, do your own research, but it's crucial to recognize that while many philosophies and cultural narratives seem to be framing this as some sort of inevitable thing that needs to happen, it's really not a state of existence that a person can sustain. Instead, it can often become a way for us to avoid healing, to remain stuck in cycles of anger, cycles of hurt, cycles of self justification, because this might be replaying in our mind. Look at what you had to go through. Look at how you overcame. I'm not saying that there's not strength in that. What I'm saying, and here's the big one, the one that people can't seem to accept, but the one that would change everything for you. And once I understood what I'm about to tell you, it actually did change everything for me, because ultimately we hold the responsibility for our own suffering. Let me explain. It's not to say that external circumstances don't contribute to your own pain, people, circumstances, whatever. But rather, what it's saying is that our role in interpreting, responding to, and managing these challenges matter. There's your responsibility. And yeah, the philosophical and cultural views on suffering might seem to glorify it as some sort of inescapable part of life, or getting that badge of honor, which most of us have had. It's important that we look at this perspective and we kind of challenge this in our lives so that it doesn't impede our own journey to healing. And so we're not choosing the same, relationships, jobs, etc., that actually aren't doing us any service. So it shouldn't be seen. Suffering should not be seen as a personal state or some sort of mark of pride. I don't want it to become a comfort zone for you that anchors you to some sort of familiarity, some pain that feels familiar, and you can't, it prevents you from healing, and it certainly gives you an excuse and a huge reluctance to change, which could mean, if you bring it full circle, moving into 2025. I mean, most of us have made, it's a big thing, right? Make a resolution, change a bad habit, adopt a new good habit. I also want to tell you, it doesn't mean dismissing the real pain or the lessons it can teach us, but rather recognizing when it becomes a crutch and it prevents you from moving forward. So here's how you can actually begin to shift away from this idea of suffering and move more towards a healthier approach. One of the things that you can do is redefine your strength. Understand that true strength lies in seeking help, not just enduring pain, right? Overcoming something. Actually, true strength lies in seeking help and choosing to heal, okay? So you don't have to endure that unnecessary pain. Strength is also vulnerability. So it does allow yourself to feel, heal, and discard that protective layer that you may have around that trauma maybe that you suffered, or something going on in your life that's not benefiting you. And you also want to create a new personal narrative. So you want to start telling yourself new stories where you actually overcome challenges, because you're gonna be faced with those, without glorifying the struggle, right? Don't don't glorify it, but yes, you overcame it. Focus on the recovery and the growth, not just actual pain that you felt or are feeling. And you do want to embrace some positive psychology. I talked about some psychology and their perspectives, but engage with practices that emphasize resilience. And you're going to build resilience, yes, but you're focusing on your healing. So you're going to engage in some practices that can help you do that, like gratitude, connection with others. They can help shift your focus from what makes you suffer to what brings you joy and fulfillment. And you also want to seek constructive feedback. This is a biggie and really hard for people to do, especially if they're in the throes of some sort of emotional suffering or they're really trying to heal. Well, sometimes we may not be aware of our own patterns. Okay, a lot of the times because we're living inside of our own bubble. So, talking to friends, talking to trusted family members or a therapist who can provide you some honest feedback about your own behavior, because you can't really see your own behavior the way others see it. It can actually open your eyes to how you might actually be preventing yourself from healing and actually clinging to this idea of suffering. Which, if you look at my past video on that, and I will actually link it in the description, I talk about it was a real quick video that I made because I realized it just became so apparent how people really like to suffer. And it's really not this idea of liking to suffer, it's this idea of holding on to something that feels familiar and not moving past that. Another thing is you can practice mindful reflection. I think that goes hand in hand with really seeking constructive feedback. Now, when you seek constructive feedback, please do it by someone you trust and know that has your best interest at heart. Now, when you are practicing mindful reflection, it just simply means that you're engaging in this mindfulness or even meditation so that you can be still and try to understand your thoughts, try to understand your emotions, because this can help you recognize when you might be providing justifications in your life somewhere where you have pain or when you're genuinely processing and maybe moving past it. Okay. You also want to cultivate, and I think this just really thinking about cultivating healthy relationships, you're going to want to surround your people who support your healing and growth. Positive attracts positive, negative attracts negative. So you need to be mindful of who's in your circle, and you're going to try to avoid environments that are going to just continue these toxic cycles of suffering, glorifying, enduring that pain without any resolution, because resolution is important. And of course, practicing gratitude because there's always something to be grateful for. Let us move away from viewing suffering as some sort of necessary path to honor. Let's make 2025, let's meet our resolutions, and let's also make it the year that we actually heal and we actually meet those expectations that we set for ourselves. I think that you can do it by focusing on building genuine paths that you can find to recovery and happiness, and they're going to look different for everybody. So don't just pick someone and try to model and follow them. Make sure that you use what works for you, because each step that you take away from this unnecessary suffering in your life, you're stepping toward that more authentic, joyful life. Also, you're doing your physical health a service, because when I mentioned endorphins, but when you're stressed out, you have a whole bunch of other neurotransmitters that are expressing constantly, cortisol being the stress hormone, and that actually can cause an inflammatory response in your body. And that's not good. Over long term, that begins to cause a lot of physical issues in your body. So not only is it good for your emotional health and you have a positive, joyful life, a realistic one, just so you know, hassles, stresses, they're going to happen every single day. I'm talking about the deep stuff that you've been putting off, healing so that you can move forward, because the choice to begin healing is ultimately up to you. It's certainly a courageous one for you to do, because you're moving away from a pattern that's easy for anybody to get it in. It's not easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. So when you decide to do this, it's going to require you to be patient, to be understanding, to be kind to yourself, to find support, and also that it's courageous to seek help if you need to. And you need to prioritize your well-being over enduring some sort of familiar unnecessary stress, pain in your life. And if this conversation that we've had here today has resonated with you, consider exploring these themes further with a professional or within some sort of safe, supportive community. Consider subscribing and sharing this, giving this video to someone you think needs it. Give it a thumbs up. It's free to do it. And as always, take care of yourself and each other, and I'll see you in the next video.